everyone. In this session, I shall discuss science fiction and H.G. Wells' The Invisible Man in brief. Let us go to 1859. It was the year Darwin's Origin of Species was published. It brought such a shock to the entire world. The faith that the people had in religion, in God, in Christianity shook, because till then people believed that man was created by God and he was the product of the original sin. But then, coming up with Darwin's theory of evolution, man was simply the next form of a monkey, and his theory of survival of the fittest proved that it all depends on nature, how man would evolve in the coming future. So this theory was a kind of a challenge for the entire system of ethics and religious beliefs and their faith in God. So it so happened that some writers who were excessively interested in Darwin's theory came up with this science fiction. So H.G. Wells can be said as the father of the science fiction, because in 1895, when his first novel, The Time Machine, came out, people had a different thing to imagine in front of their eyes. So immediately the effect of science reached the nook and corners of the world. To every reader who read The Time Machine was enthralled, and he could imagine the magic that science could do in the coming days. So to speak about the history of science fiction, it was not just the product of the latter half of the 19th century, but then the idea of science writing or a kind of a science fiction existed long back in the 12th century, and he was Syrian satirist Lucian, who spoke of such a kind of a thing but couldn't be materialized. And then coming back, we also have it in the days of Bacon in his New Atlantis. So this is how it has, even Plato talked of the invisibility of man in some way. So these philosophers had that idea, but then as a fiction it could be materialized only in the second half of 19th century. So we should have what is being written in a science fiction. What are the themes or what are the areas which a science fiction writer could cover? It could be time travel. This is one major aspect of science fiction, that a person immediately jumps into millions and millions years ahead into the future world. So this is jumping from the present into the future. This is called as the time travel. And then you have telepathy. Telepathy is not a new thing for us, because we knew it even in our Indian history. If you go back to the Mauryan dynasty, you have Chanakya teaching Chandragupta telepathy. That is, even if Chanakya is some 100,000 miles away from his guru Chanakya, it is with the help of this telepathy, as you know, these are a kind of wire-like things, you know, from one person to another. The message reaches without the intervention, the message goes in the air. So this is a connection between brains. So Chanakya used to send signals to Chandragupta as to how he should deal with the war. Even on the battlefield, in the absence of his guru, he could get those signals. This was a kind of telepathic network that we had. So this telepathy is also one of the major themes in science fiction. Then you have teleportation. So you have two humans in whose bodies you have these chips fixed, and they don't talk to each other. They don't even talk on wireless. But then the chips, the chips, you know, give and take the messages. This is also Then you have a telekinesis, that is sitting somewhere in a kind of a laboratory. Some person could visualize something being shifted from one place to another, and that could be done. A group of people being shifted from here to there. So, or calling some people to a particular place. This was all kind of a telekinesis. So, and then you also have the world of the aliens. Many movies have come regarding this. Even Hitler was becoming so tyrannical. So people around him thought that he was inventing something called as flying saucers and all those things. That was a kind of a Nazi conspiracy that he had. So So that was visualized then, even during the time of Nazi Confederation, because of the development of the science fiction. And then you have parallel universes being created. So yours is one universe, and the 90% of the space that is yet unknown to us could be visualized by the science fiction writers. And then you have a fictional worlds being created. So this is all the thematic concern of a science fiction. And you have two kinds of fiction being written here. You have the hard science, you have the soft science. Hard science is any story or any fiction being imagined on an invention already that has taken place. So this soft science is something which is still in the minds of the people. It is still a kind of an ongoing experiment. It has not been materialized. It is just in the area of the psychology which comes out in the kind of a fiction. So these are the two areas of science fiction. So you know what are the themes of a science fiction, you know how it has its own history, and then you have two kinds of science fiction being written. So the popularity of the science fiction comes from the soft science, that is totally imaginary world being created by a scientific fiction writer. Now, coming to H.G. Wells as a writer of science fiction, let us brief his biography. He was born in England in 1866. He was born to domestic servants in a very poor family. He was threatened with poverty every now and then in his childhood. But then one thing you must remember about H.G. Wells as a person is that poverty never hit his psyche. He was one of the happiest kid found in his days. He never thought of the riches, or he never thought anything about poverty to such an extent. His mind was totally a different thing. It was a kind of a mind that had its own world of science right from the beginning when he worked as a servant. So he couldn't get enough education. Very soon he was appointed as a person with a draper, assistant to a draper, and then he was an assistant to a chemist, and again he was assistant to a draper, and this continued till the age of 18. He got a kind of a scholarship with the help of which he could learn biology in London University, where he came across one of his loveliest teachers, T.H. Huxley, who was the force behind H.G. Wells' writing career. So with the help of T.S. Huxley and with the kind of education that he could complete there, he made his mind that he would be coming up with the science fiction. So in the year, after having worked a lot on this, in the year 1895, his first novel, The Time Machine, came out. And what a brilliant performance H.G. Wells had in this novel. It was about some time traveler who went millions and millions years ahead into the future, and there he lands on in a world which has only two races, bourgeois and proletariat. It is named in his own way, but I am just telling it for you to understand this. So there he doesn't make a similar kind of a story. He doesn't make the superiors rule the inferior. The inferiors are the stronger than the superiors. The race, that is the proletariat race, overtakes the bourgeois race and eats them someday. And this is how the so-called superior races come to an end in the time machine. What he wants to say is that as Darwin speaks of evolution and the man going to further stages in the history of evolution in the coming days, H.G. Wells also talks of degeneration of that evolution. It could happen that at some point of time this evolution will suddenly end and man has to come back to his original, a cell or an atom or whatever you call. So from there again he has to start afresh. So if you look at such kinds of stories by these science writers, you will realize that a science fiction was not a kind of a mere fantasy, or it was not for kids to enjoy something in the future. But then a science fiction always hinted some social progress or social degradation. It spoke of peace, it spoke of tyranny. So it had its whole construct around the social life of a man. So you should know that H.G. Wells was a lover of peace and world harmony. This is what he was expecting, and this is what is seen in his Invisible Man also, which we will be discussing. But before that, I would love to tell you that until the First World War broke out, H.G. Wells had a hope that man would somehow return back to his religious beliefs. Man would somehow return back to his villages, and the mass migration that is taking place would take a kind of a reversal. But then with the sudden arousal of the First World War, he as a writer, he as a person literally collapsed to the extent of insanity. So this is how a writer is not just a kind of a creator of a fantasy, but he is so much involved in the social politics of the science and its uses, the formation of bombs and the bombarding of nations and the Nazi conspiracy affects these writers that somehow they destroy themselves in their own imaginary world. So this is what I wanted to tell about the effect of Time Machine that had on H.G. Wells. It's not just a story, you have to go into a kind of an in-depth research. Our focus today is not Time Machine, but our focus today is the Invisible Man, written by H.G. Wells. It was his second novel after the Time Machine. Time Machine was published in 1895 and this came out in 1897. So now you have the story of a doctor called Griffin who has lost his interest in being a physician. Now he wants to become a scientist. With the immense knowledge that he has gained in the world of science, he's been a lover of his own laboratory, that he wants to do something, he wants to give the world something good initially. But then over ambitious that he is, like the Shakespearean tragic heroes, he ends up with something really disastrous. So what is that? Is the story in this novel. So Griffin, a doctor, initially becomes a scientist now. He is working on the theory of invisibility. So in order to make a nation powerful, for the love that he has for his nation, England, he wants this is the effect of colonization. So the greed that is there in the English mind is endless. Now that the English mind is working on some other concept, being invisible and conquering the world again, like Alexander the Great. So this man, Griffin, wants to make man invisible and then wage a war. This is a strange kind of a war being waged by Corona these days. So invisible war, the bio war, this was all dreamt by H.G. Wells in those days. So now Griffin is working on this, and one fine day he thinks that he is successful in it. And this is all against his parents. His parents don't want him to work on this because they know some or the other day something wrong will take place. But then he is very ambitious. He takes the cat as his first experiment, and he works on the cat on this theory of invisibility. It is half successful. The cat is half visible and the cat is half invisible. Somehow this experimentation on animal fails. At last he doesn't want to kill someone, so he wishes that the experiment should take place on himself. But then he needs a lot of money for this, and the father is not ready to pay him, and this is how he steals all the money. He gets into his hands all the wealth that is there with his father, and in a fit of tragic disaster, the father dies. So this is a kind of an indirect murder of the father. But robs all the money and runs. And then in this process, he's been experimenting on himself, and someday the experiment becomes successful. So he becomes invisible. But he hasn't worked on the next step, that once he becomes invisible, he has to come back to his visible form. So he hasn't worked on it, and having become invisible, he fails to convert himself into the visible form. So now he is not visible to the people around him. The voice could be listened, the noise could be heard, but the person is not visible. So he could be considered in any way. But then at this point, he doesn't feel it a kind of a defeat. Now, but he has a lot of time to work again on this. He will take his own time and become visible. But then this is the space, or a kind of a gap given in his life by God himself. He thinks he can create terror among the people. This is again the English mind working. He can create terror in the whole whole world with the power of invisibility, and he can do many things that he wanted to do. So now he wants to become master like Hitler or Alexander. Now see how one thing develops into another. This is just not a kind of a scientific fiction. It has its role in politics, it has its role in scientific affairs, it has its role in economic affairs and religious affairs. So it's a kind of a parallel study going on. Now he wants, he is naked now. He is so happy, undressed. He doesn't want to dress because he is not visible. He is enjoying everything in his own way, very raw. But then one fine day, because it's winter, he wants to buy clothes. He goes to a shop, and somewhere something happens between the owner of the shop. So he commits murder again. So this is the second murder that he does, because he knows who, nobody will realize. So one after the other he has committed many murders. Now he is enjoying terror. One doctor, one scientist who wanted to give his country a kind of a gift now has become a terrorist himself. And in this process he kills many people. And he thinks that England is not a nice place for a study, because it's full of noise, and every now and then some or the other person knocks at the door. So he wants to find a place where he can go and sit quietly and focus more on his experiments. Now he chooses a place called Epping, and it's winter season, and Epping is quite a silent place because it's very cold there. People don't come to Epping, and the people in Epping are uneducated. Most of them are illiterate, and they do not know much about science and its progress. So anything that happens there, they won't mind it so much. So taking this advantage of the people there, he lands into Epping. So there he finds a kind of an inn. It is called as Horses and Coach Inn, owned by Mr. and Mrs. Hall. So here Mrs. Hall is a dominant lady, because his body is not visible. How can he approach people? He covers the whole body with bandage. No skin is available in his body. There is no flesh and skin in his body. Everything is a kind of a vacuum. So he covers his whole body with bandage so he could be visible, and he is in a black coat, black trousers. And this is how he comes and stands in front of Mrs. Hall. Initially she is shocked, but then he says he has met some accident, and that is how the body is being bandaged, and he has come here to rest for a while and study. And since he pours and pours money over her, she doesn't think much. She allows him to stay. And one or the other person in the course of time comes to know that he is not an ordinary man. There is something wrong with this man. And every now and then one or the other person will be giving hint to Mrs. Hall that you have given shelter to a wrong man. He could be a terrorist. He could be an anarchist. People in the town, in the village start thinking that he could be a peabard. He could be a bogeyman. He could be some criminal who has escaped from police. But then Mrs. Hall loves to keep him. She calls him the kind of a budding experimentalist or a budding scientist. So it so happens that one day all his money is over. Now he doesn't have much to pay her, and she started troubling him that he should vacate the room. Now he wants to steal someone, he wants to rob someone, so his eyes fall on the rich vicar, Mr. Bunting, who stays there. So one night he enters into Mr. and Mrs. Bunting's house, and they are fast asleep, but there is some noise in their study room, so they go and see that the candle is being lit and there is no human figure anywhere, and they could feel the noise of the papers and the creaking of the doors, and he has already stolen much from their house, and he has stored it in his pockets, and before he could go, since it is winter, he's caught up by cold because he's undressed most of the time. He sneezes. So immediately Mr. and Mrs. Bunting come to know that this is not a ghost, or this is not a P-man or any black magician. This is a kind of a human, but he has done something to himself, so this should be found out. So because of that sneeze, he's being suspected there, and immediately he had to vacate the room in the hotel. Now this is the vicar has informed the police official called Jaffers, and Mr. Jaffers is behind the strange invisible man. And now immediately by the time his room is full of some empty bottles necessary for the experimentation, he has all kinds of liquids there, and he has his notes written in notebooks. They are all in codes, so that if in case he dies and somebody gets hold books and notes, they should not be able to read it. So they're all in a kind of code language which is only known to him. So before he could gather everything and run from there, the police are by the door. So he escapes, leaving all the things there. So from Epping, so he had to discard Epping and he runs towards South Downs. That is another place, South Downs. So he goes there, and on the way he just wants some assistant for him so that he could bring all his books that he left behind in the hotel. So he meets one person called as Thomas Marvel, and he's so much fantasized by this invisible man that he somehow bribes him and tells him that if you help me, I could also give you some amount of my energy to you, some knowledge to you, so immediately you can be a rich man here. So he helps him, he brings those notebooks, but before he could meet this man, the invisible man, he's so scared that he takes the books and runs himself. And he has also stolen money from the room and he runs himself, and what happens to him we will see in the end. So now Marvel not being returned, so he keeps in search of some man who will be of some help to him. He comes across Mr. Dr. Kemp. So this Dr. Kemp was a friend of this invisible man. Now his name is disclosed. He is Griffin. So he is the friend of Griffin in the college days. So now he is ready to help him. So he listens to all the story. But then this man has very bad ambitions of terrorizing the world. So initially he listens to everything. He comes to know about his ambitions, and then he promises to help him. But then back in his mind, he is prepared to get this man arrested because this could be a great harm to the nation and to the world in general. So he goes and informs this to Colonel Addy, a military general. So now he would be arresting this man tomorrow. So this is somehow leaked, and Griffin comes to know that this is a great fraud being done by Dr. Kemp. So before he could escape from there, he warns Dr. Kemp that in his ambition of terrorizing mass murder, Dr. Kemp would be the first person to be murdered, and he would be experimenting all his terror on Dr. Kemp first. And somehow he escapes for a while, but he's surrounded by, because of the noise that he makes, he's surrounded by people of the place, South Downs, and also the military has come to the place, and now he knows that he would be arrested and something would go wrong with him. This is a nice thing to watch in a movie. The Invisible Man is also a movie now. You can watch this movie. So how this fight takes place. Imagine the bravery of Dr. Kemp fighting with something that is literally invisible. But then the people also come there, and there is so much of fight, and at last he is wounded inch by inch. So the more the wounds on his body, the more disclosure. His body is seen. So the blood starts flowing, his body is seen. So at the end, when Dr. Griffin is almost murdered, killed, and he's fallen on the ground, immediately his body is invisible. Visible to the people. Now Colonel Addy is so much scared to see the wounded man and the kind of body that he has in front of him. So immediately they bring something and cover the body. So after the death, the body was visible. So this is not just a story. The death of this invisible man or a terrorist is the depth of the nakedness of science, which has terror at its base. Because somehow H.G. Wells was expecting something bad to happen out of the science, and this is how he connects science to as an enemy to the world peace and harmony. So each and every fiction of H.G. Wells, as he has written a series of science fiction, so ends up with a social message. So if this continues, if this is the kind of ambition that England has and its colonization, so this is how it could be. The end of the Invisible Man, the end of Griffin was nothing but the end of England and its monopoly. So this is how H.G. Wells has his science fiction as fantasy with a great moral behind it. But as I told you, soon after that, he was literally aspiring for world peace, but then after the World War I, all his dreams were smashed, and all that he wanted to give to England went in vain. and he became so insane with the development of science that it ate himself also. So this is how we find people writing about science and teaching us the merits and demerits of science through their science fiction. So science fiction, don't take it that easy. So you have to look at it from various angles, and because since now you dear students are into a world of science, you have your computers, you have your mobiles, you have so many gadgets around you, and you still don't know how these gadgets are eating your soul, your brains, your nerves. So one fine day, your position also could be like what happened with Griffin. So we need to be aware of the developments in science. So this could be the message of science fiction in general. So hope you understood and you have developed a love for reading science fiction, and please read these two books, The Time Machine and The Invisible Man. These are very interesting things, and these are universal things. They don't have an end. The book still continues, and continues for coming generations also. So dear students, thank you for this quiet listening. Thank you.